Hi everyone, really happy to be there. Thank you for taking your coffee post-lunch with me to talk about regulation. I'm Faustine Fleuret, I'm Head of Public Affairs at Morpho, previous CEO of ADAN, so really passionate about regulation for a very long time. And my goal for now, for the next a little bit less than 20 minutes, will be to speak about policy at both sides of the Atlantic, both in the EU and in the US, when it comes to crypto regulation and especially DeFi regulations, because there are lots of things being done and lots of things to be done in the next months and years. And so it's very important for you to know, to be aware of that, because at some points, you as industry players are part of this process with policymakers of shaping this policy environment for crypto actors. So it works. C'est vous qui passez les slides? Okay, I'll push strongly. Okay, so first, I know that you are all really knowledgeable about crypto and DeFi, but if we have to take a starting point, and that's the one that I usually take with policymakers, public policymakers, but also financial institutions, is to explain that crypto and especially DeFi is not a side word of the financial world that is being reshaped today thanks to new technologies. So usually they are much more knowledgeable about tokenization, about centralized markets, and so they can see DeFi as a niche, and that's something that lives apart from the traditional financial sector, and it's not. And so usually the first things to do is to re-explain why we are talking about tokenization, how we are heading to DeFi with this process of tokenizing finance, and why actually everyone from policymakers to financial institutions and banks should pay attention to be cautious of what's happening, because tomorrow they will be part or not, depending on if they seize this opportunity to participate to tokenizing finance. So usually the way that I like to maybe simplify, but to explain what is tokenization, is to explain that we are in the next wave of digitalization of markets, because you all know that we already have digital finance in the way that we have, of course, we have notes, we have coins, but we have money, scriptural money. The financial instruments are represented digitally, no longer on papers. And actually, in France, there was the obligation to digitalize the market in the 80s. So we already live in a digital financial world, but the layer are centralized technologies, proprietary technologies that at some points are not that efficient, not as efficient as blockchain technologies. And so when I speak about tokenization, I summarize that it's let's say digitalization 2.0 of finance. We had digital markets on centralized technologies, and now we are shifting to another technological paradigm with blockchain technologies, and finance is currently moving on this new layer. And so actually, their question afterwards is, why are we heading to new technologies while we already have those financial markets that are running well, quite well? They are not perfect, but they are running. And that, actually, it's very important to explain why institutions must be on board and what's their interest behind tokenization of finance. So I know you are all very expert in blockchain technologies and crypto assets, but if we have to sum up the value proposition of tokenization of finance, we could leverage those points. So first, the fact that markets can run every second of every minute of every day all along the year, and that's something that does not exist as of today. The fact that they can have atomic settlement, atomic payments, so instant operation, which is actually can take some days in some segment of the finance today. The fact that you will be able to automate, so to escape from human failures, from subjectivity of humanity, thanks to automation through smart contracts, and that's something that strengthens the efficiency of markets. Obviously, let's say the crux of financial markets, the liquidity, which will be more globally accessible and defragmented. Obviously, transparency, traceability, etc., etc. So at the end, if we are talking about tokenization, it's because it brings a lot to finance, and that we are already moving to this new financial paradigm and seizing those new opportunities of blockchain technologies. And so what is DeFi in all of that? Actually, if you are bringing finance on blockchain technologies, you actually need a new layer, a new technological architecture. And DeFi is here to be this new paradigm on which you will be able, when you will be issuing and you will be trading value on blockchain technologies, you will be able to leverage all the opportunities of DeFi protocols and what they can bring in terms of new financial services, new services that can be powered through protocols rather than intermediaries. So if we want to show it simply, we have this paradigm as of today, where the back end of financial intermediaries are segmented, are proprietary, and so it's really inefficient if it comes to accessing global liquidity, if it comes to collaboration also. And so with DeFi, we're actually moving to this paradigm where the back end will be unified and powered by those blockchain technologies, and where all those financial institutions and banks will be able to plug and will be able to access. So that's something usually that they are not aware, is that DeFi is not competing with intermediaries, but intermediaries which will be using DeFi will be competing with those which do not use DeFi, and that's very important for them to understand that they actually have to take part in helping the growth and the development of DeFi protocols. So maybe you learned nothing from here because you're in the crypto sector, but lots of institutions, lots of policymakers are still to understand what's happening in terms of tokenization of markets, in terms of the growth of DeFi. And so, as I said in the introduction, both in the EU and in the US, policymakers and institutions are actually thinking about what do we need in terms of regulations, in terms of policy, in order, it depends on where you are, to help the development of this industry, and I would be on the US side of the Atlantic when say so, or how to mitigate the risks, the new risk of this on-chain finance, and that will be more the vision of the EU. And so I will both address EU and US approach to crypto and DeFi, and what you will see is that it's not a difference. The main point is not the difference in terms of regulation, but actually the difference in terms of vision that we can have or not, depending on where you are in the EU and the US. So actually in the EU, we are already addressing regulation of crypto markets for a very long time, because if we take, let's say, the Genesis block of MiCA, it will be the consultation launched by the European Commission in 2020, and then MiCA, with the whole legislative process in the EU, was implemented in 2024. So it takes a long time, but we have a framework, a regulatory framework for centralized crypto markets. So those crypto asset service providers, if you already saw this technical legal concept, those actors providing services, investment services on crypto assets, so like custody, exchanges, portfolio management, advice, investment advice, etc., etc. So that's something that is already very live, because nearly all actors need to comply with MiCA as of today. I say nearly all because there is a tolerance period for some, and including French actors, which they benefit from a period till June, the end of June, to be able to comply with those EU requirements. And MiCA is a very, very big piece of regulation, very burdensome if you take especially newcomers. The goal behind, and for regulators, what was the purpose? It was to make sure that we ensure investor protection, the fight against market abuses, the fight against financial criminality, and financial stability in Europe. That was really the focuses of policymakers in Europe. And so it's a massive regulation, especially for those newcomers in the crypto sector, the native actors, which had to deal with that. But actually, we usually forget that behind MiCA, there are lots of other regulations. So when you're a crypto actor in Europe, you don't only have to comply with MiCA, and so all those dedicated rules because you are you're providing services on crypto assets, but also lots of other pieces of the EU legislative framework when it comes to cybersecurity, when it comes to information sharing in terms of taxation, etc. So not only the specific crypto regulation, but also non-specific crypto regulations for, let's say, financial stakeholders that main of those financial stakeholders have to comply with in Europe. So it's not only about MiCA, it's about lots of regulations, and it's very important for policymakers to remember, and that's something that we have to tell them again and again. Financial institutions and banks, when they grew with regulation. I mean, at first there was no regulation, there was a first one, and then it was a bit sophisticated, etc., etc. So it grew with the industry, the banking industry, the traditional industry grew with regulation. And that's not the case with the crypto industry, which has to comply with everything at the same time. While you are, for some, like 3 years old, 5 years old, 10 years old. So it's very difficult, I mean, for newcomers to enter the EU market now that you have MiCA and all those regulations applying to them. And so we said there was MiCA. There is not only MiCA, and there won't be only MiCA. I mean, there is already a work done by the European Commission to think about strengthening this framework for crypto markets. And so we are engaging a review of, like, I think 14 pieces of financial regulations in Europe, including the DLT pilot regime, including MiCA. So for those centralized actors which already have to comply with those requirements, but also for new actors and maybe DeFi actors, which at this stage are not tied to any regulation. And it was a smart move from the European Commission at the time MiCA was debated, because they realized and they were aware that DeFi was quite small, that was niche, we were not with volume and values comparable with the traditional financial sector. They had to understand lots of new things, because we cannot apply the traditional regulatory paradigm of intermediaries in the DeFi world. So at the time of MiCA, they decided, like, to wait a little bit. But because they are maybe engaging a MiCA review as soon as next year, DeFi will be on the table of the discussion. And that's a big problem, because in those past years, where all this regulatory work was done, there was something that was not developed, is the EU vision. We are still lacking an EU vision behind the Web3 in general, crypto and DeFi. And that's something that makes a huge difference with the US. Why? Because in the US, regulation will be the support of a vision, and the vision is simple in the US, is to make the US the global hub of crypto. And that's something that we don't have in Europe, and that even if we worked a lot, policymakers worked a lot on the regulation of crypto actors, we are still lacking. They are still lacking to understand why they are doing that, and the reason that they are regulating, it's merely because it's not regulated. And it's not enough as a reason. And at some point, maybe there are some layers, and especially in DeFi, that must not be regulated, that cannot be regulated. So the biggest problem that we will have in the EU is this lack of vision, this lack of strategy, that in the US we really developed for the past year with the election of Donald Trump, and a lot of pieces like the executive order, the strategy that was published in last July, etc., etc. Also in Europe, we don't share the same bet as in the US when it comes to what will be the settlement and payment layer tomorrow of this on-chain finance. Europe decided to bet on the digital euro, and really MiCA was here to limit the development of euro stablecoins rather than developing it, and at some point they start to regret this strategy. While in the US, they are really aware of the powerful environment around US stablecoins that they have, and they really want to encourage the US stablecoins to develop even more and to be to remain the hegemonic asset in the on-chain monetary system, let's say. So we are really lagging behind on the stablecoin thing. It's also because I spoke about what is tokenization, and well, at some point in Europe we are thinking that it's an experimentation already, still an experimentation, sorry. While tokenization is ongoing, and there are already lots of institutions that are doing lots of things, tokenizing financial products and going on-chain. And it's really clear when you see the rationale behind the DLT pilot regime. And Europe is thinking that we still need to check whether tokenization is a trendy or is a sustainable move. And that's really something different compared with the US. I spoke about the coming MiCA review next year. We can think that maybe it's a bit early when we think that MiCA was implemented only one year ago, and that for both actors and policymakers, we are still learning with doing. And so maybe we are rushing into regulating even more while we are still lacking this vision and lacking lots of also resources to be able to implement this regulation. And when it comes to DeFi, there is no exception. I mean, we don't have a clear vision of why we should develop competitive, attractive EU crypto markets. And actually, as we are starting to discuss about DeFi regulation, we are lacking also why Europe should regulate DeFi to make it competitive and to make it attractive. So that's why we have to pay attention to in the coming months. So I already spoke a little bit about the US, and I see that time is flying. So the main difference will be that it's accelerating in the past few months, and it's going very fast. When I said MiCA, we needed like 5 years to be implemented. The first framework for stablecoins in the US was debated in like 6 months, 8 months maximum, before being adopted at the US Congress. And so we see that if the US is now, well, leaving this word of law by enforcement and making the regulatory environment more clear, more stable, they can do it really fast. And we will lack maybe the only advantage that the EU had with this legal clarity with MiCA. There are very, very important debates right now with the Digital Assets Market Clarity Act, which will be the framework for digital asset service providers, which is already dealing with some DeFi language. So it's really important to follow, even if at this stage it remains stuck because of the stablecoin yield issue. Maybe you heard about that. And in the US, we have much more institutional adoption. I don't have time to review all the examples, but as you can see, banks, financial institutions, asset managers, payment networks, they are all already tokenizing and migrating on blockchain technologies. Anyway, maybe the EU has a chance to catch up, and maybe we lost some battles, but not the war, because there are several milestones in the US political life that can be that can have a big impact on the crypto policy. And actually, we in the US have a short window, favorable window, in order to implement favorable crypto policy, because with the midterm election in November, it's barely sure that there will be Democrats gaining some, maybe one chamber at the Congress, and so we know that they are not really favorable to crypto. So, well, if there are things to be done, it has to be quickly in the US. Otherwise, it will be much more complicated at the end of the year. So, and as I said, as the Clarity Act debates are stuck as of today, as long as it remains stuck, the less chance we will have to have a regulation to pass this year, and afterwards it will be much more complicated or disfavorable if Democrats are taking the lead. I don't know if I have time to give all the recommendations that we bring to policymakers, but if you have time to read it before I am pushed out of the stage, the goal is that we have the chance now, because the debates are ongoing on DeFi, to be part of that as industry players. And there are, let's say, key principles that we have to push them as soon as now in order to make sure that this regulation, which is to come, is the best, the most appropriate possible for the EU DeFi industry. So I don't have time to develop more, I'm sorry, but I would be really happy to answer questions and to follow up with more discussions after this talk. Thank you very much for your attention.